You should sit somewhere else." The words cut clean through the soft golden light of first class as Evelyn Carter refused to even glance at the ticket in Marcus Hale's hand. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't move. He just stood there in the aisle unnervingly calm while the flight attendant hesitated and the entire cabin quietly looked away. Because to them, Marcus looked like the kind of man who didn't belong there. No one imagined that minutes later, the whole flight would be held on the tarmac, and the man who walked aboard was the airline's CEO. The jet bridge smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee. Marcus Hale walked it without hurrying, a canvas duffel over one shoulder, a jacket that had been washed too many times, boots that had walked more miles than most of the shoes on that aircraft ever would. He held his boarding pass folded once down the middle the way a man holds something he does not need to check twice. At the door, he nodded at the gate agent, and she nodded back. The way people nod at someone they have already forgotten. First class on that aircraft was 12 seats, 4 rows of 3-wide leather warm lighting, the kind of cabin designed to make people feel selected. There were glasses of champagne already out on the consoles, sweating a little in the cabin air. A man in row 3 had a laptop open and a watch that cost more than a car. A couple in row 2 spoke to each other in the low-clipped voices of people who had flown this route so often it bored them. The air had a hush to it, expensive and thin. Evelyn Carter was already in seat 1A. She had a cream blazer folded over the armrest, a phone in one hand, and a handbag placed on the seat beside her, as though it had purchased its own ticket. She had settled into that seat the way water settles into a low place without decision, without doubt. She had not looked at the row number when she sat down. She had looked at the window and at the space and at the light, and she had decided it suited her. Sophie Bennett worked the front of the cabin that morning. She had been flying for 3 years, long enough to know the rhythm of boarding and short enough to still care about being liked. She counted heads, checked the galley, and greeted each passenger by looking at their face for exactly 1 second before moving on. When Marcus stepped through the door, she gave him that 1 second, and something in her face did the arithmetic that people's faces do. Jacket, duffel, boots. Then she smiled anyway, because that was the job. He came down the aisle slowly. The man with the laptop glanced up, registered him, and looked back down without changing expression. There is a particular silence a cabin makes when it decides someone has wandered into the wrong part of the airplane, and Marcus had heard it before in other rooms, in other years, and had long ago stopped letting it land on him. He had spent 11 years on the operations side of an airline before he walked away from it, and he still knew which desk answered on the second ring, and he had never once used that. He had raised someone alone, and it had cost him most of what he used to own, and all of what he used to expect from strangers. He stopped at row 1 and checked the folded pass in his hand, though he already knew. Seat 1A. Window. He had booked it 11 days earlier, and had chosen the window because he wanted to sleep against something solid. Then he looked at the seat and at the woman in it, and at the handbag, sitting where a second passenger should have been, and he understood what the next few minutes were going to cost him. The cabin door was still open. Coach was still boarding, and passengers kept pushing past him toward the curtain with bags held above their heads, and every one of them looked. Departure was 8:15, and the clock above the galley said there were 26 minutes left. That was the shape of the moment before it broke: warm, light, cold champagne, a full cabin, and a man standing in the aisle holding a piece of paper that said plainly and without argument that the seat in front of him was his. "Excuse me, ma'am." Marcus's voice was low and even-pitched to carry no further than the row. "I think you're in my seat." Evelyn Carter did not turn her head. She kept scrolling with one thumb and let a second pass in the way people do when they want you to understand that answering you is a favor. Then she said without heat, without interest, "I'm sorry, 1A." He held the boarding pass out, angled toward her. "This is my seat." She looked finally, not at the ticket, at him. Her eyes moved down the worn jacket over the duffel across the boots, and back up, and whatever conclusion she reached it fast and without effort. Then she turned back to her phone. "There's been a mistake," she said. "You should sit somewhere else." The words cut clean through the soft golden light of the cabin. The man with the laptop stopped scrolling. The couple in row 2 went quiet mid-sentence. Nobody looked directly at row 1. Everybody was listening. "There's no mistake," Marcus said. He did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He simply kept the ticket where it was held out in the space between them, patient as a fact. "It's printed right here. If you want to check yours, I'll wait." "I'm not going to check anything," Evelyn said. "I'm settled. My things are out. There's an empty seat 2 rows back. I can see it from here. This is a very simple thing you're making complicated." She said it the way a person says something they have said before and never been contradicted on. That was the part that told Marcus everything. It was not anger. Anger would have meant she thought this was a fight. She spoke to him like someone managing an inconvenience, and the certainty underneath it was older and heavier than the argument itself. Sophie Bennett came up the aisle, then hands folded in front of her, smile already assembled. "Is everything all right here?" "This gentleman thinks he has my seat," Evelyn said before Marcus could speak. Marcus held the pass out to Sophie instead. She took it. She looked at it, then at the row marker on the bulkhead, then back at the paper, and Marcus watched the exact moment her face understood the problem. It was very brief, and she covered it well, and it was still there. "Ma'am," Sophie said, turning slightly toward Evelyn. "Could I see your boarding pass, please?" Evelyn produced it from the handbag without looking up. Sophie read it. 2C aisle, 1 row back and across. She held the 2 passes side by side, 1 in each hand, and the arithmetic of the situation was now sitting in her palms with nothing left to interpret. "Ms. Carter," she said carefully, "your seat is 2C. This is 1A. I'm aware of what my ticket says." Evelyn set her phone down at last, and her voice acquired a polished edge. "I'm also aware that we're due to push back shortly. I've been flying with this airline for 19 years. I don't think anyone wants a scene over a seat number." That was the first threat, and it was well made because it did not sound like one. Sophie's smile did not move, but something behind it shifted. The clock above the galley now said 21 minutes. She turned back to Marcus, and Marcus already knew what she was going to ask before her mouth opened, because he had seen this shape of moment in offices and waiting rooms and the backs of stores, and it always resolved the same way. The person who is right gets asked to be reasonable, because the person who is wrong has made it clear they will not be. "Sir," Sophie said, "you're absolutely correct. This is your seat. And I'd really appreciate it. Would you mind taking 2C? It's a wonderful seat, and it would let us get everybody settled and out on time." Marcus looked at her. Then he looked past her at the cabin, at 11 adults in a small, quiet room who had all heard the same 2-seat numbers read aloud, and had all decided that the cheapest thing to do was nothing. "No," he said. The word did not sound like defiance. It sounded like a door closing softly in a house where everyone had assumed the door didn't work. Sophie blinked. Evelyn's head came up. The cabin, which had been listening, now stopped pretending not to. "I'm sorry," Sophie said. "I paid for 1A. Marcus said, the ticket is valid. You've confirmed it twice. I'm not asking anyone to do anything difficult. I'm asking for the seat that belongs to me." Sophie's hands came together in front of her, the 2 boarding passes still between her fingers. She was. Marcus could see, not a cruel person. She was a young woman standing in a narrow aisle between one passenger who would make her life difficult and another who she had assumed would not. She had already made her calculation about which of them was cheaper to disappoint, and she was only now discovering she had calculated wrong. "Let me get my manager," she said. And she went. David Klein came forward from the galley curtain 40 seconds later, with the particular briskness of a man who had handled 200 of these and expected to handle 200 more. silver at the temple's uniform, pressed a tablet held against his ribs like a clipboard. He took in the aisle the standing passenger, the seated one, and the flight attendant between them, and he arranged his face into something warm and managerial before he spoke. "Good morning. I'm David Klein, the cabin manager. Let's get this sorted quickly for everybody." He held out a hand for Marcus's pass, took it, and thumbed the tablet awake. The manifest came up. He read it, then read it again, slower. And Marcus watched the second reading land the same way Sophie's had. "Mr. Hale, 1A. That's confirmed." He turned the tablet slightly toward Evelyn. "Ms. Carter, you're 2C. Also confirmed. There's no duplication here. The system has you both correctly assigned." "Then it's confirmed," Marcus said. "Thank you." But David did not turn to Evelyn. He held the tablet and he looked at the seat, and something in his posture recalculated, and Marcus felt the floor of the conversation tilt very slightly beneath him. "Ms. Carter, are you unwilling to relocate?" "I'm not unwilling to do anything," Evelyn said pleasantly. "I'm simply already seated. I've had a long week. I have a call the moment we land, and I would appreciate the window." "I'd have thought that was a small request from a 19-year customer." She let it sit, then added lighter, "I don't understand why this is being turned into something." David nodded slowly, and the nod was the whole story. Marcus had seen the nod before. It was the nod of a man measuring which passenger would file a complaint, which one would call the executive line, which one had status attached to their record, and which one had a canvas duffel and a jacket washed too many times. "Mr. Hale." David turned to him fully, and his voice dropped into something confidential and generous. "Here's what I can do. 2C is a full first-class seat, same cabin, same service. On top of that, I'll put $400 in travel credit on your account right now, plus a meal upgrade and priority on your next booking. Honestly, that's a better outcome than the seat. What do you say?" Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked at the offer the way a man looks at a hand extended in a dark hallway, checking whether it is help or a hold. Then he asked a question instead. "Mr. Klein, is my ticket valid?" "It is." "Is that my seat?" "It is." "Then why?" Marcus said. "Am I the one being offered $400? The cabin heard that. The man with the laptop had stopped pretending a full minute ago. In row 2, the husband looked at his wife, and his wife looked at the seat back in front of her, and neither of them said anything. And that silence was now doing something it had not been doing before. It was accumulating. David's smile held, but the warmth in it thinned. "Sir, I'm trying to find a solution that works for everybody." "You've already found the solution," Marcus said. "It's on your screen. There's one seat, one name, and one correct outcome, and everyone in this row already knows what it is. What you're looking for isn't a solution. It's the cheaper problem." "That's not fair," David said. "No," Marcus agreed. "It isn't." Evelyn made a small sound of impatience and turned toward the window, as if the conversation had already been settled in her favor and was now merely running long. "This is exactly what I meant," she said to no one and everyone. "He doesn't want the seat. He wants the incident." Marcus kept his eyes on David because David was the one holding the tablet, and the tablet was the only thing in that cabin still telling the truth. "I'll say this once clearly so nobody has to guess later," Marcus said. "I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'm not refusing to fly. I'm refusing to give up something that is legally mine, because giving it up is more convenient for the people who are wrong. If you want me out of this seat, that's a decision the airline can make. But it will be the airline's decision. It will be on the record, and it will not be a favor I did for anybody." The clock above the galley said 14 minutes. In row 4, a young man in a gray sweatshirt lifted his phone from his lap quietly and held it low against his knee, angled toward row 1. Sophie saw it and said nothing, and looked at the floor. David Klein let out a slow breath through his nose. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone, replaced by something flatter and more official. the voice of a man reaching past persuasion for the next tool on the shelf. "Mr. Hale, I want you to understand that we have a departure slot and 211 passengers on this aircraft. Crew instructions on board are not negotiable, and I'd hate for this to become something larger than a seat assignment." "It stopped being about a seat assignment," Marcus said, "when you offered me money to be wrong." David held his eyes a moment longer. Then he tucked the tablet under his arm, turned and walked through the flight deck door, and everyone in that cabin understood exactly who he was going to get. He was in there 90 seconds. When he came back out, he came out alone, and Marcus understood immediately what that meant. The captain had sent him to try once more, which was its own kind of answer. "Mr. Hale, let me lay this out plainly." David kept his voice low, aimed at Marcus alone the way a man does when he wants the rest of the cabin to hear him being discreet. "We have a slot at 8:15. If we miss it, we go to the back of the sequence, and that's 40 minutes on the ground. There are people behind that curtain with connections in Denver. There are people traveling for a funeral. None of them know what's happening up here, and none of them will care whose name is on which seat when they're standing at a rebooking counter tonight." "That's a real problem," Marcus said. "It just isn't mine. It becomes everyone's. Then solve it the way it's written on your screen." Marcus had not moved from the aisle in 14 minutes. His duffel was still on his shoulder. He had not put it down once, and something about that, the refusal to settle and the refusal to make himself comfortable in a dispute he had not chosen, was beginning to unsettle the people watching. "One sentence, Mr. Klein. Ma'am, your seat is 2C. That's all it takes. You've said it to me twice already. Say it to her once." David's jaw worked. He glanced at Evelyn, and Evelyn was watching him with the mild, expectant attention of a customer waiting to see whether the service would meet her standards. That look did more work than anything she had said out loud. Marcus watched David absorb it, and watched him choose, and he had watched enough men make that choice to know it before it finished arriving. "Ms. Carter has been a Diamond member with us since 2007, David said. "That doesn't make her right, but it does mean I have to weigh the whole picture." "That's the first honest thing anyone said in this row," Marcus told him. Evelyn set her phone face down on the console with a small, precise click. "Since we're all being honest," she said. And her voice reached the whole cabin now, no longer bothering with the fiction of a private conversation. "Let's be honest about what's happening here. Nobody has been rude to this man. He was offered a seat and money. He turned down both. That tells you he isn't here for a seat. He's here for a story." "I'm here for a flight," Marcus said. "You're holding 200 people on the ground over a window." She turned in the seat to face him properly for the first time since he had arrived, and there was something almost pitying in it. "Do you understand how that looks? Everyone in this cabin is being inconvenienced because you decided this morning to make a point. If you actually cared about anyone but yourself, you'd have been sitting down 10 minutes ago." It was, Marcus thought, a genuinely effective argument. It took the thing he was doing, standing still, and made it look like an act of aggression, and it handed everyone watching a way to blame him for a situation he had not created. He could feel it working. He could feel the sympathy that had been quietly forming behind him begin to hesitate. He turned and looked at them, not accusingly. He simply turned and looked one row at a time and let them decide what to do with it. Row 2 studied the safety card. Row 3 found something urgent on a spreadsheet. In row 4, a woman folded her magazine shut and held it in her lap and looked at it as though the cover had become difficult. Only the young man in the gray sweatshirt held his gaze. He gave Marcus a small nod, barely a movement, and did not lift the phone any higher. Sophie Bennett saw the nod too and understood that whatever happened in this cabin was already outside it, already permanent. And she still said nothing. "You're being asked politely," David said, and the word asked had begun to carry weight it had not carried before. "I'd like to keep it that way. On board this aircraft, crew, instructions are not suggestions. That's federal, not company policy, and I don't think either of us wants to get into what non-compliance means. Say the rest of it, Marcus said. I'd rather not. I'd rather you did. Out loud in front of everyone so nobody has to guess later what was said. Marcus's voice stayed level, but it had acquired an edge like the flat of a blade, not threatening, just unmistakably hard. Because what you're describing is a crew instruction ordering a passenger out of his own confirmed seat so that another passenger who is in the wrong doesn't have to move. If that's a lawful instruction, say so plainly, and I'll note who gave it. If it isn't, stop implying it. The clock above the galley read 9 minutes. David looked at it, then at the flight deck door. And this time he did not have to go through it, because it opened on its own. The captain came out with his hat off, which told Marcus he had been briefed and had decided to make the walk look casual. Daniel Reeves was a broad man in his 50s, with the unhurried physical confidence of someone who had spent 30 years being the final authority in every room he entered. He came down the aisle without rushing, nodded at row 2, and stopped at row 1 with his hands loose at his sides. Morning. I'm Captain Reeves. He looked at Marcus first, which was something. I'm told we've got a seating dispute. I'd like to hear it from you then. From you, ma'am. Then I'll make a call, and we'll be done. Fair, Marcus said, and handed him the boarding pass. Reeves read it, turned it over out of habit, and handed it back. He held out a hand toward Evelyn, and she gave him hers without comment. He read that one longer than he needed to, and when he lowered it, Marcus saw the exact thing he had already seen twice that morning. Cross a third face, the small collapse of a man discovering the situation has no ambiguity in it at all. Ms. Carter, you're in 1A. Your ticket is 2C. Mr. Hale's ticket is 1A. I'm aware, Evelyn said, and I've explained my position to your staff twice. I'm not being difficult. I'm being asked to move for no reason other than a line on a piece of paper by a man who has already refused compensation for the same seat. If the paper is what matters, why is he the only one who gets to hold it up? Reeves absorbed that without expression and turned to Marcus, and in the 4 or 5 seconds before he spoke, Marcus felt something he had not felt since walking through the aircraft door, the beginning of relief. The captain had just said it out loud, cleanly in front of everyone. The record was straight. There was nothing left to interpret. The only thing remaining was for the man with the most authority on the airplane to do the simplest thing available to him. Mr. Hale. Captain Reeves said, "You're right. Thank you. And I'm going to ask you to take 2C. The cabin made a sound. Not words, a shift. A small collective intake, the noise 11 people make when something lands wrong. Sophie Bennett, standing at the galley curtain with her arms at her sides, closed her eyes for a moment and opened them again. Marcus did not move. He had been braced for a fight about the facts, and instead the facts had been granted to him in full and then set aside as irrelevant. And that was worse than being called a liar. Being called a liar meant the truth still mattered enough to be worth denying. This meant the truth had been weighed, acknowledged, and found not to be the deciding factor. "You just confirmed the seat is mine," he said. "I did. And it is." Reeves's tone did not change. That was the part Marcus would remember longest. There was no cruelty in it, and no discomfort either. "But I've got an aircraft to move. Ms. Carter isn't going to relocate without a scene, and you strike me as a man who can. That's not a judgment about who's right. It's an operational decision about what gets this airplane off the ground fastest." "Then say what it actually is," Marcus said. "It's not about who's right. It's about who's easier. Call it what you want. I'm calling it what it is. You looked at both of us and decided which one would cost you less to overrule." Marcus's voice had not risen once, but the whole cabin was inside it now. "She told you no, so you stopped asking her. I've been polite, so you kept asking me. That's the entire system operating exactly as designed, Captain, and everyone in this row just watched it happen." Evelyn turned back toward the window with the small, satisfied stillness of someone whose position has been confirmed. "Thank you, Captain," she said. Reeves did not acknowledge her. He kept his eyes on Marcus, and there was something in his face, not shame, but the awareness of being seen. And Marcus understood that the captain knew precisely what he had done, and had decided long ago that knowing was enough, that a man could do the wrong thing cleanly as long as he did not lie to himself about it. "To see Mr. Hale, please." "No." The word came out no louder than it had the first time. Sophie flinched anyway. Something in the cabin's arithmetic had changed with the captain standing there. A refusal aimed at a manager was a complaint, and a refusal aimed at the man in the 4 stripes was something else entirely, and every person in first class knew it. "I want to be careful with you here," Reeves said, "because I don't think you understand where this goes. I've issued you a crew instruction. If you decline it, I'm required to treat you as a passenger who won't comply with the flight crew. That means I call the gate, and law enforcement removes you from this aircraft. That's not a threat. That's the procedure, and it runs whether I like it or not." "I understand the procedure," Marcus said. "I want the record to show what the instruction was. The record will show what I put in it. Then let's make sure it's accurate." Marcus shifted the duffel off his shoulder and set it down on the floor at last, and the small sound of it landing was the loudest thing in the cabin. "Captain Reeves, I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'll follow every safety instruction you give me. I'll stow my bag, fasten my belt, do whatever the flight requires. What I'm refusing is to surrender a confirmed seat that you and 2 members of your crew have now verified is mine, in order to accommodate a passenger who has publicly declined to sit in hers. Those are two different things, and I'd like your report to say which one I did." "You're playing lawyer. I'm playing citizen." He said it without heat. "Everybody in this cabin has spent 20 minutes explaining to me why the wrong outcome is the practical one. Nobody has explained why the right outcome isn't available. It's 1 sentence. It's been 1 sentence the entire time." David Klein stepped in from behind the captain tablet out. "Sir, I'll give you the names. Mine is David Klein, employee number 44681. You can file whatever you want after the flight. Right now, I need you seated." "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "I'd like the captain's as well." "Daniel Reeves," the captain said flatly. "You'll find it on the manifest." Marcus took his phone out of his jacket pocket. It was an older model with a cracked corner, and Evelyn glanced at it and looked away in a manner that said everything she had not bothered to say aloud. He did not raise it. He did not point it at anyone. He pressed a contact he had not called in 11 years and lifted it to his ear, and the cabin watched him do it with the fascination of people watching a man light a match in a room they had assumed contained nothing flammable. "Who are you calling?" David asked. Marcus didn't answer him. The line connected on the second ring, and what he said took less than 20 seconds, and he said it in the same even tone he had used all morning. And afterward, almost everyone in that cabin would recall the words slightly differently, because none of them were the words anyone expected. "This is Hale. I'm on the 815 out of gate 22. There's a passenger occupying my assigned seat. The crew has confirmed the assignment 3 times, and the captain has instructed me to vacate it instead. I'm not asking for an intervention. I'm reporting it, and I want the timestamp." He listened for perhaps 4 seconds. "Yes, all 3. I'll hold on the aircraft." He lowered the phone and put it back in his jacket pocket. Captain Reeves was looking at him differently now, and so was David Klein, and neither of them would have been able to say exactly why. There had been no name on the other end. There had been no threat. There had only been a man who spoke to an operations desk as though he had once sat behind one. "Who was that?" Reeves said. "Someone who keeps records," Marcus said. For a moment, nothing happened, and the silence in that cabin was the worst thing in the whole morning, because the call did not change anything. That was what Marcus had known when he made it, and what the cabin discovered in the 20 seconds afterward. No one came. No radio crackled. The clock above the galley clicked past 8:15 and kept going, and the aircraft did not move, and 11 people simply sat there and let it happen. Captain Reeves rolled his shoulders once the way a man does when he has decided to stop being persuadable. "Mr. Hale, I've heard you. I've confirmed your ticket. I've told you you're right, and I meant it. And my instruction stands. You will take 2C, or I will have you removed from this aircraft. Those are the only two outcomes on this airplane, and one of them ends with you in a terminal explaining yourself to a police officer, while this flight leaves without you." "And she keeps the seat," Marcus said. "She keeps the seat." There it was spoken plainly at last by the highest authority on board, with a full cabin listening. Every person in that room had now heard the truth, stated confirmed, and then overruled, and not one of them had moved. Marcus looked at them one final time. The businessman in row 3 was staring at a screen he was not reading. In row 2, the couple were holding hands, which he supposed was something. The woman in row 4 had her folded magazine pressed flat under both palms, as though it might otherwise get away from her. Only the young man in the gray sweatshirt was still recording, and he was 20-something and alone and had no power in that room at all. "This isn't about a chair," Marcus said, and for the first time all morning something moved in his voice, not anger, something older and more tired. "It's about the fact that every single person with authority in this cabin has now looked at the truth, agreed with it out loud, and decided it costs too much. You didn't get it wrong. That's what I want on the record. Nobody here got it wrong. You all got it right, and then set it down." "Last time," Reeves said, "take the seat or leave the aircraft." Marcus reached down and picked up his duffel. Evelyn Carter allowed herself the smallest exhale and turned toward the window, and the light through it caught the rim of her untouched champagne glass. And that was the moment when the forward cabin door, which had been closed and armed 4 minutes earlier, was disarmed and unsealed from the outside. The door swung inward, and cold jet bridge air came with it, thinner and sharper than the warm engineered air of the cabin. Everyone turned. Captain Reeves turned last, because captains do not turn quickly, and when he saw who was standing in the doorway, his hand came off the seat back in front of him. The man in the doorway wore a charcoal overcoat over a suit with no tie, and he carried nothing at all, which was somehow the most unsettling detail about him. Behind him in the jet bridge stood the gate agent who had nodded at Marcus half an hour earlier, holding a printed manifest with both hands and looking at the floor. "Mr. Vaughn," David Klein said, and the tablet slipped in his grip. Richard Vaughn did not answer him. He stepped through the door and stopped at the front of the cabin with his hands loose at his sides and took in the room the way a man takes in a photograph he has already been shown. The passenger standing in the aisle with a duffel in his hand. The woman in seat 1A with a handbag on the seat beside her. The captain out of the flight deck. The manager holding a tablet. The flight attendant at the curtain. "The aircraft is held," Vaughn said. "Nobody moves it until I say so." He was not loud. He did not need to be. The clock above the galley read 8:19. Behind the curtain, 199 people had no idea why the door had reopened, and the crew back there had not been told either, and the only sound in first class was the ventilation. "Sir, I can walk you through the situation," David began. "You'll get your turn." Vaughn turned to Sophie Bennett. "You were the first crew member involved. When did you check both boarding passes?" 26 minutes ago, sir." Her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be, but it did not shake. "Both passes side by side in my hands. And what did you find?" "That Mr. Hale was correct. And what did you do?" Sophie looked at Marcus, then at the floor, then made herself look back up at Vaughn. And that was the moment Marcus decided he did not hate her. "I asked him to move," she said. Vaughn absorbed it without expression and turned to David next, and David had the sense not to reach for the tablet again. "I verified the same, sir, within a minute of arriving." "And you offered him what? 2C plus $400 in travel credit and a meal upgrade. You offered a customer $400 to give up something he had already bought. Vaughn said, so that another customer would not have to be told a true sentence. Do I have that right? David did not answer which was the answer. Vaughn turned to the captain last, and something in the cabin tightened because the two men were roughly the same age and roughly the same build, and only one of them had authority on a moving aircraft. Cool. Captain Reeves, you reviewed both boarding passes. What did you find? That Mr. Hale was right. Reeves said it flatly, exactly as he had said it in the aisle. He was not a man who hedged. I told him so. Then I instructed him to relocate to 2C. When he declined, I told him he'd be removed from the aircraft. You told a passenger who was right, and who you had told to his face was right, that he would be removed by law enforcement in favor of a passenger who was wrong. Why? Because she wasn't going to move. Reeves said. And he could. And I had a departure slot. Richard Vaughn stood very still. Then he looked around the cabin at the 12 seats at the businessman, with the half-closed laptop at the couple in row 2, at the woman in row 4, with the folded magazine in her lap at the young man beside her. Anyone here see it differently? Vaughn asked the cabin. Nobody spoke. Not one of them. The young man in the gray sweatshirt opened his mouth, and then didn't, and Marcus saw it and understood, because he had spent his life around rooms that went quiet at exactly the wrong moment and had long since stopped being surprised by it. That's what I thought, Vaughn said. He turned to seat 1A. Evelyn Carter had not spoken since the door opened. She had spent those minutes rearranging herself, and by the time Vaughn's attention arrived, she had assembled the version of herself that had always worked before. Composed, gracious, faintly wounded, the posture of a woman who has been misunderstood by people who do not know who she is. Mr. Vaughn, she smiled at him with real warmth. I don't think anyone here has explained the full context to you. Ms. Carter, is that your ticket on the console? It is, but what seat does it say? The smile held for another second, and then began to come apart at the edges. 2C. But you should understand, I was seated before this gentleman even boarded, and no one told me there was a problem until 2 employees told you, Vaughn said. Then a captain told you. Then you were told again in front of a full cabin. Nobody in this room has been confused about the facts for the last 25 minutes, ma'am, including you. I'm a Diamond member since 2007. I know exactly what you are. He said it without cruelty, which made it land harder. You're a customer who understood that the crew would rather move a quiet man than a difficult one, and you were correct. That's not your failure, that's ours. But it stops on this aircraft this morning in front of everyone who watched it happen. He held out his hand, palm up toward the aisle. Move to 2C. Now. Evelyn Carter looked around the cabin then, and it was the first time all morning she had done it, and it did not go the way she expected. The businessman was watching her directly. The couple in row 2 were watching her. The woman in row 4 had set the magazine aside entirely. There was nowhere in that small room to put her eyes where somebody was not looking back, and that was worse than being shouted at. She stood. She gathered the handbag from the seat beside her and the cream blazer from the armrest, and her hands were not entirely steady, and she stepped out into the aisle and moved 1 row back and across and sat down in 2C without saying anything at all. She did not apologize. She looked straight ahead at the seat back in front of her, and she stayed that way. And by the end of the flight, she would still be sitting exactly like that. Mr. Hale, Richard Vaughn said, that's your seat. It's been your seat since 6:51 this morning. I'm sorry it took a held aircraft and the chief executive of this airline standing in the door for anybody on board to act on that. Marcus did not say anything triumphant, and he did not look at Evelyn Carter. And afterward, that was the part several passengers would mention when they described it to other people. He simply walked the 4 steps he had been trying to walk for 34 minutes, stowed the duffel in the overhead, and sat down in 1A. The leather was still warm from someone else. He let it go. Thank you, he said to Vaughn. But don't thank me. I'm the reason there's a policy that let this happen. Vaughn turned to Sophie Bennett. You checked the passes first and asked the wrong person to move. Is there anything you want to say? Sophie came forward from the galley curtain. She stopped beside row 1, and she did not look at her manager or her captain, which took more from her than anything else she did that morning. Mr. Hale. Her voice carried down the whole cabin, and she let it. I had both boarding passes in my hands. I knew you were right before I said a single word to you, and I asked you to move anyway because you were polite, and she wasn't, and I thought you'd be the easier one to disappoint. That was the whole reason. There wasn't a better one. I'm sorry. Marcus looked at her for a moment. You're the only person on this aircraft who said out loud why they did it, he said. That's worth something. It isn't much. It's more than the rest of them managed. Vaughn let that sit before he turned back to the 2 men still standing in the aisle. Captain Reeves, you'll fly this aircraft. You're the only person qualified to move it. 211 passengers have somewhere to be, and I'm not punishing them for what happened in this cabin. But there will be a full review of this incident. The escalation, the compensation offer, the removal threat, and every decision made by every crew member on board beginning with the 2 of you. There. Understood, Reeves said. Mr. Klein, you offered $400 of company money to make a correct outcome go away. I want that written down in your own words before you leave the airport tonight. Not a form. Your words. David Klein nodded once. He had not looked at Marcus since the door opened, and he did not look at him now. And for the record, Vaughn said, addressing the whole cabin, nobody is being removed from this flight. The airline made this situation, and the airline is fixing it, and no passenger gets thrown off an airplane to cover a decision we made. He turned to go, then stopped at the door and looked back at Marcus one last time. The report came into the operations desk at 8:11, he said. It named the flight, the gate, the seat, and the fact that 3 crew members had confirmed the assignment. The man who took the call recognized the voice. I was in the building. That's all it took, 22 words, and somebody willing to write them down. Marcus didn't say anything. He had never claimed the call would work. He had made it so there would be a record if it didn't. The door sealed at 8:26. The aircraft pushed back at 8:34, 19 minutes late, and the people behind the curtain never learned why, and most of them never thought about it again. First class flew differently after that. The businessman closed his laptop entirely and did not open it for the rest of the flight. The couple in row 2 spoke in low voices, and once, when the wife glanced forward at row 1, her husband put his hand over hers, and neither of them said anything. Something had happened in that cabin that none of them had done anything about, and now they had 4 hours to sit with it at 31,000 feet. An hour in, the businessman got up, walked forward, and stopped beside seat 1A. He stood there a second, hands in his pockets, a man clearly unaccustomed to not knowing how to start. I should have said something, he said. You should have. Marcus agreed. I kept waiting for someone else to. Everybody did, Marcus said. That's how it works. The man nodded slowly and went back to his seat, and that was the closest thing to an apology anyone in that cabin offered, besides Sophie Bennett. Evelyn Carter did not move from 2C for 4 hours. She refused the meal service. She refused the drink. When Sophie came through the cabin, she looked past her at the seat back ahead, and Sophie did not press, and the 2 of them completed the entire flight without exchanging a word. She had spent 19 years learning that a certain tone of voice would resolve most things in her favor, and she had used it that morning exactly as she always had. And it had worked exactly as it always had, until it stopped in front of a full cabin, and a held aircraft, and a man who simply would not move. The video posted that night at 11:41. It ran 6 minutes and 22 seconds, filmed from row 4, at knee height, shaky at the start, and then very steady. And it caught almost all of it. The ticket held out in the aisle, the sentence about sitting somewhere else, the offer of $400, and the captain of a commercial aircraft saying you're right, and then take 2C in the same breath. By morning, it had 400,000 views. By the end of the week, it had 19 million. The airline's statement came on the second day and named the review. The compensation policy that let a cabin manager buy his way out of a correct outcome was rewritten within the quarter, and 2 crew members were reassigned pending the outcome. Sophie Bennett's apology was in the video too, at 5 minutes and 14 seconds, and it was the part most people shared. Marcus Hale did not give an interview. Reporters found his name inside 2 days, and he answered none of them. And by the 3rd week, the internet had moved on to something else which suited him. He was not a hero, and had never tried to be one. He was a man who had bought a window seat because he wanted to sleep against something solid, and who had discovered standing in a narrow aisle in front of 11 silent adults that being right is not the same as being protected, and that the difference between the two is made up entirely of people deciding one at a time whether to say something. That is the whole of it. A man's worth is not what a room assumes when it looks at his jacket and his boots and the bag on his shoulder. It never was. And what was right in that cabin was right at the very first minute, when a flight attendant held 2 boarding passes in her hands and already knew which is the only minute that ever really matters, because once silence takes the side of what is wrong, everyone standing in it has already chosen.